You're in and out a little bit with the volume. And we are live. So welcome to Manchester Young Professionals Adulting 101 series. This is how to land your next job opportunity. And so we do a series of Adulting 101 geared toward like the ins and outs of everyday scenarios for young professionals. We do basic finance, different housing issues, local, cooking classes that are a lot of fun. So this is the second time that we're doing a resume review, interviewing job search topic. Really popular last time. We're gonna have a good time. I have a couple of my colleagues on here. My name is Gabe Dano. I am the programs chair for Manchester Young Professionals, also on the advisory board, professionally with the Nagler Group, staffing and recruiting. And I have with me two colleagues. So we have a few sister companies, Megan Lustig with the Alexander Technology Group, and Maddie Bushey with KNF&T Staffing Resources. I'll let you guys introduce yourself and a little bit about what you do, and I have a question for you too. Now, how did you get into staffing? At least for me, and I don't know if it's like an actual saying, but they say, you don't find staffing, staffing finds you. Totally happened to me. I was just looking for an opportunity. Few interviews down the road, I'm a recruiter. So. Now, Megan, a little bit about your specialty and how you got into staffing.
Yeah, I'm Megan. I work at Alexander Technology Group. We focus in IT staffing projects mainly, migrations, implementations, things like that for clients in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. I, like Gabe said, fell into staffing. I started off in customer service. I worked up into a customer service manager position and decided that I wanted to make a change. And through that, I started talking to recruiters, started learning more about what they do, and decided that I wanted to try that myself. So here I am.
And I'm Maddie. I work at KNF&T Staffing, and we do mainly administrative and HR and customer service type of staffing. I also fell into staffing. I think that's pretty common. I went to a staffing agency to interview for an administrative position, and they said, hey, we have like a 3-week temp gig here if you want to be our receptionist. And then next thing you know, 5 years later, I still work there as a recruiter.
Yeah, I think a few of our colleagues too that started like on a temporary basis, and we could talk about all about different ways to find jobs and opportunities. But as far as us and our expertise as recruiters, we offer temporary, temp to hire, direct hire placements. It's a really good opportunity and a route to find your next job. So welcome everybody that's joining us today. This session is really a resource for young professionals going forward. We're going to record and save everything for future use. And for those that are attending today, definitely go to the bottom, ask a question. We're going to go through kind of a chronological way of going about your job search, your resume, job search, interviewing, some tips and tricks. We'll take questions as we go. We'll do a wrap up if there's any lingering questions at the end. It's kind of how it works for if you haven't used Crowdcast. It's a really neat platform where you can just kind of either ask a question or endorse other people's questions so they kind of float toward the top. If you're like, oh, that's a great question, definitely endorse others. I'm just going to go from there. We're going to have a casual conversation about your job search. I think we're going to start there with the resume. So now, where do you start? You're looking for a new job, whether you have a job or you're brand new, you're getting out of the job market, you don't really have a resume. Maddie, what do you think as far as recommendations for creating a resume? Do you go based off a template? How do you format that, and what do you look for as far as a recruiter when you're looking at incoming resumes?
Yeah, I think truly if you have never done a resume before, a template is a great option, especially just because it gives you the basic tools of how to format that without just kind of putting anything on a piece of paper without the knowledge. So I think if you're going to go with the template, though, I would start with something super basic. Go for one of those templates that has just the very kind of bare minimum of things. I think kind of something that I've been seeing, especially with more, new applicants, they seem to like to use these kind of very intricate graphic design type templates where your information's all over the place. And I think that's actually a little bit distracting and kind of confusing for people to read. I think personally as a recruiter, I prefer a very straightforward resume. I want to be able to see specifically what is your education, what are your skills, what have you done? And that kind of helps me to better put you in a position. So I think that using one of those kind of easy to fill in templates is a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And then to follow up with that, Megan, too, it's always a question, do you put your education at the top? Do you put it at the end? And then also, how do you describe each of your jobs? Like, do you just kind of put a paragraph on what you did, or do you use those bullet points to lay it out? What do you think?
Yeah, normally I think the education should go on the top. However, if you went to school for, I don't know, business, and you're applying for, let's say, a job in IT, you might not start with that. Like, you might put some more applicable things at the top, maybe some certifications you got, maybe some sort of, anything that you can tie to the job that you're applying for. I think there's also something to be said for having a couple different resumes, depending on what the job is that you're going for. Sometimes, candidates or job seekers are applying for more than one type of position. As far as how to set it up, I think bullet points are really nice. I think, again, try to keep it simple, but still give detail, outline some of the stuff that you've been doing in your current position and past positions. Try to include some technologies you worked on. I saw a resume recently, and it wasn't really in bullet points, and I felt like it was very overwhelming. And I felt like if a hiring manager opened that, they would probably feel the same way. So I think bullet points are a nice way to go.
Yeah, that's a really good point there. When you look at a resume, if it's like a paragraph and it explains what I did there from start to finish in different scenarios, it really might take away from if you were to use bullet points, because as a hiring manager, you're really looking at action items. Like, what did you do? Maybe some metrics in there, really stick to the point of the responsibilities. And then during the interview process, that's really want to dive into some of the intricacies about kind of what went on during the job and different responsibilities. So really good points. And I saw a couple questions raised about, let's see, Sean asked, should we have a headshot in your resume, and when is that applicable? Either of you have any experience with when and why you should have a headshot?
Personally, I vote no on the headshot. I don't think it's necessary. I think you should have a LinkedIn page with a nice photo of yourself, and that's where the employer should go to look at your picture. I think having it on the resume, just personally, I find it a little funny, kind of almost, to see it. I think it's a little distracting from looking at the resume. So I think have a nice LinkedIn post where you can have your picture and all of that. Don't put it on the resume.
Yeah, that's really good too. I deal with a lot of hiring managers, and I would say save the headshot for your social media. And we'll get to social media as well. But I have a lot of hiring managers that I give them the resume, and then they immediately, the first thing they do is check out the LinkedIn profile. So we get to that as well, and what we want to portray as your own personal brand. That's a really good point. That I'd say resume, keep it to your experience and skills. And Megan, thoughts on, and it can go either way on this too, I think, but resumes, a lot of people say that it should be one single page. Now there's leeway with that, but what are your thoughts on length of a ideal resume?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I do like the one page thing. But if there's a lot of good experience, I would say just try to, put the most information on your most recent, most applicable positions, and keep the bullet points shorter on, maybe jobs that you've had in the past that aren't as applicable. If you have to go over a page, I think that's fine. I think once you start getting to 3-4 pages, that's definitely way too much. So just try to keep it short and sweet, again, towards the bottom. And just think about too, like, what's easy on the eyes. Like, you don't want one page and then just like a second page with 2 bullet points, like, at least if you're going to go into a second page, make it at least like a fourth to a half of the page. Try to make it look nice and play around with the fonts and stuff, to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Aesthetically, yeah, if there's like 2 bullet points on the second page, there's probably a way that you mess with the format to fit it onto one page. And if you have enough experience, yeah, I would say I would say no more than 2. I send a lot of resumes that are 2 pages, but if they're, if you have the experience and you have 4 or 5 relevant recent jobs, then it's not a problem if you go into 2 pages, but 1 is that kind of standard if you can fit it. And then lots of the resumes too, keywords is a big thing too. I know we as recruiters use keyword searches. I know corporate recruiters might have a more automated system as far as how they weed through resumes. Maddie, are you doing a lot of keyword searches? And what, is there any recommendations as far as people that want to highlight their experience in certain fields?
Yeah, I think keywords definitely are a big part of a lot of the searches that we're doing, especially as, certain employers are looking for more specific types of candidates. So I think that, looking at job descriptions of jobs that you're interested in and trying to pull out words that you think are relevant in that job description. Some of it is just basic as far as, if you're looking to get into human resources, have the word human resources somewhere on your resume. Little things like that can kind of pull you out. And I think also just looking at kind of skills too, I think that's changing a little bit. Employers are looking more at keywords of skills on resumes versus just not necessarily just experience. So if you have certain skills that you can add, I definitely would say your resume, especially when you're on these sites like an Indeed where you have hundreds of thousands of resumes.
Yeah, and Megan too. You do you're in the IT and tech space. I feel like software and a lot of that lingo is above my head, but is that a good way to highlight? Is that what you use mainly as far as when you're looking for certain specific types of people?
Definitely, yeah. I had mentioned it before too. For us, I think it's important that candidates put the softwares that they've been working on in their resume, because hiring managers, recruiters, companies do search for those things. If somebody, in my world, maybe they're using a certain type of ticketing system and somebody's looking to hire somebody with experience on that. If the person has that on their resume and somebody's searching for that, they should come up in that search. So I think it's really important to include those.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. And then I had another one as well. How far back, this is a attendee question, how far back should you go as far as your experience years-wise? Thoughts on that? You know what, Megan?
Yeah. I think that's a hard one to say too. I don't think there's really a blanket answer. I think it just depends. If you've been working for 10 years and you started off working maybe as in food service or something, and now let's just say you're targeting a job in IT, just because that's my world. It might not make sense to include those jobs you had maybe in high school and college anymore. But if you're maybe a new college grad, it might make sense to include some of those things because that's where most of your experience has been. It'd be better to keep those on the resume than to just make it look like you don't have any job experience at all. So that's a hard one. Again, I think too, maybe you're somebody who has 20 years of experience in an industry and you don't want to leave off some of your, positions earlier in your career. Then in those cases, just put them on the resume, but just only include like a bullet point or 2. You don't have to include like 5, 6, 7 bullet points for a job you had forever ago.
Yeah, that'd be a good way to explain a gap. I have some people that, and I would say number 1 would be progression too. You want to explain like your progression of your career throughout your resume. But say you took a break. I have some people that, maybe you take off time to, for your family, or you switch careers, you stay there for a couple of years and you go back to what you were originally doing. You might want to put, just the title and the dates, but I wouldn't go into the experience, kind of save the space.
Mm-hmm.
Go back as far as what would be relevant and make your best judgment. And you can always reach out to, obviously we'll leave information too, but any recruiter, I wouldn't just say us. There's so many different job search professionals in the area, whether they're corporate agency, if they are independent, do that on their own as like job coaches. Just ask. People can give you or even just hiring managers too. If you know any hiring managers, just lend over your resume and say, hey, what do you think? I think that's a big point too, if you're just looking for some advice on your own. But But so, I mean, you have have your resume. Let's say it's all done. You're ready to go looking for your next job. And then, where do you start? Do you go on job boards? You just send your resume out on Indeed? Do you go through like networking or recruiter? There's pros and cons. Do you have recommendation, Maddie, on how you want to start?
I think honestly the best approach is to use every resource available to you. I do think that job boards can be a great resource just in terms of trying to figure out what you're even interested in. You can see a wide variety of jobs. You can check out different companies, see if that's something that you would want to be doing. And then based on that, I think you can get a better idea of what you're actually looking for. But then I think obviously the cons can be you put your resume out there, goes into a black hole, you don't hear anything. So I think that's why it's very helpful to use different approaches. I think using a recruiter can be great because they have a relationship with hiring managers. They can get you more feedback. They probably can get you an interview more quickly. Also can give you resources as to other places you could apply, especially if you're a new grad or maybe you're not totally sure what you want to be doing. They can show you a variety of roles as well and kind of counsel you. And then I do think too, networking and using your personal brand is great. I think a lot of schools have, lots of great resources in their career centers. So I think really using as many resources as you can is a great approach. But I do think that if you really are stuck, going to a recruiter as like a first step of just getting out there with a resume is a really good option.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely good. Use as many resources as possible. I know, you're looking for a job, you go on Indeed, you send your resume to a dozen, 2 dozen places. And you're like, well, that might have had a couple hits or not, but then there's so many different other avenues you can go to. And then, what about like, cover letters too? Some job description or job postings, they ask for a cover letter. Do you just want to use a cover letter then, or do you always want to use a cover letter? Megan, do you have opinion on, do you see cover letters and when do you recommend that?
Yeah, we don't see cover letters a ton. At least I don't, just because I am sort of like my candidate's walking, talking cover letter. So that's the great thing about working with a recruiter is that they can sort of help you write up your cover letter through speaking with you over the phone, which, kind of allows us to really highlight your skills and prevent you from getting stuck in the deep, dark web of job applications. With that, I think if you're not using a recruiter or if you're applying for something on your own, I would always use a cover letter just because that, again, is really your chance to highlight why it is somebody should speak to you about their opening.
That's good too. Like, because I know a lot of job postings, they don't require it, so you just send over your resume. But at least putting a brief cover letter and not overthinking it would be a big boost. Because one, it makes you stand out from other applicants, and it can be brief. And I would say, even if it's a sentence, two to 4 sentences, tailor it to the job specifically that you're going for. And so it's not just like a general cover letter. Hey, I'm interested in this job. Pick me because I'm writing this additional cover letter. Like, I had customer survey experience. I think I'd be good for your role. I'd love to speak with you. Brief, and it's better than not. I would say. And then let's see. What I had another question as far as and it kind of goes back to the resume too. But Kurt asked about objective statements on a resume. I see them and I don't see them, and I don't know whether or not what you guys do as far as do we keep them and forward them over to hiring managers. But the objective statement on top of a resume. Maddie, do you have pros and cons for that statement and how to do it best if you do it?
Yeah, I would say I think most resumes that I see do have something on the top of them regarding that. I think one thing that people can make a mistake in this section on is being too specific. Like, I am only looking for this type of job. And then they're sending that out to everybody. And maybe you're sending that out to a job you're applying to that is not that job. So then they're like, why are you sending me this application? So I think if you can keep it more general and talk, I'm a great administrative professional with XYZ experience, looking for this kind of role, with these skills. I think it can be, helpful, especially if you do have maybe a longer resume and you want to just have something brief up there. But I think it really can depend on the job you're applying to. Yeah,
absolutely. So, general statement, keep it broad, don't pigeonhole yourself into something that, don't want to have anybody assume that you're only looking for a certain thing. Definitely keep it nice and broad and don't limit your opportunities. And then, so you're sending your resume out and we want to, it's tough because different scenarios is different. So how do you follow up as far as, do you send an email to follow up and the progress? I guess we'll talk about that with interviews as well, but if you're just sending your resume out there, can you follow up and saying, hey, what's the status? And what if you don't know who to follow up with? Either one of you, I'm not sure who had expertise in that regards. I didn't go back far enough too, because we're all agency recruiters now, but have you, and either you've been in different forms of recruiting outside of agency?
I recruited recruiters. That's how I got into recruiting, which is interesting, but that was still sort of a form of agency recruiting. Prior to that, I did mention I was a customer service manager, so I used to get resumes sent to me through our HR department a little bit, but I didn't necessarily have candidates follow up directly to me on their application or after their interview.
Yeah. So if you have the hiring manager's email and you're emailing them your resume and applying to them, what do you want to say in like a quick, follow-up email? And do you do that? And how, when would you do it?
Like a thank you email, you mean? Like after you interview?
I guess it can go both ways. We'll go after the interview in just a second, but what if you don't hear anything? What if you kind of left in the dark, but you do have a point of contact that you want to, like, hey, what's the status?
I say go for it. Just keep it short. Make sure you're being appropriate. I wouldn't send more than one email, especially if you don't get a response, but I don't think it could hurt to do that. I say, why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's always a good thing to show that you're still interested, and even if it's submitting on a website or something, you can find some kind of contact to at least say, just following up to make sure someone has received the resume. Like, I just want to make sure someone even got this, and just maybe expressing just briefly, very interested in the opportunity. Just want to make sure you've seen my resume. Let me know what the next step is. That's fine.
Yeah, that's a good one. Confirmation that it was received, at least, just to get a response and then kind of see where the process goes. But then that leads into interviewing as well. So you got the interview, and the dynamic has changed a lot these days. There's the phone screen, there's a virtual interview. So let's start with, a lot of companies do an initial quick phone screen, whether or not that's planned and scheduled, or they just call you off the cuff, which is tricky too. Maddie, what do you recommend as far as prepping for a phone screen and making sure that it's that you're focused on top of it?
Yeah, I think phone screens can actually be super tough because they can't see you, so they don't get like the facial cues of kind of how you're reacting to things. It's all in your voice. But I think I always recommend to people to make sure they're smiling while they're talking on the phone, because I think that can convey in your voice that you're excited and happy about the position. But I think really prepare for it as you would for any interview. Make sure you know the job, the company you're interviewing with. Treat it, like a formal interview. And also make sure that you're in a space where it's going to be quiet. You can hear what the person is saying. There's not going to be a lot of background noise for them to hear. People hate it when they can hear, it's crying in the background or, TVs, things like that. So I think just being aware that even though they can't see you, the actual environment you're in is important, and for yourself to be focused, that you don't have distractions around you that you're going to be looking at instead of talking to that person.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The environment, especially when you get into the virtual interviews too, definitely got to be mindful of your space. But Megan, I want to talk a little bit about also if you get sent Zoom is most common, but it might be Teams, it might be another platform. If you're sent a virtual interview request, what are you doing in preparation to make sure that runs smoothly? A little bit different than phone screen.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we're seeing more and more of those interviews nowadays in this new world that we're in. I think it's really important to do a practice run, see what you look like, whether that be you maybe turning on Zoom yourself or even using, if you have like a FaceTime sort of application on your computer screen, just kind of seeing what you look like, looking at your surroundings. Try to keep it simple. I try to sit in front of just like kind of a plain wall. I've seen other people use backgrounds too. With that, I again wouldn't do anything like too distracting, but just kind of keep it simple. we don't want to have, random things hanging out in the background or anything really distracting, or be sitting in front of a doorway or something where people could be passing by. You just want to keep it simple. Even like, what Maddie and Gabe have, mine's definitely a lot more plain than theirs is, but theirs still looks really presentable, really nice. I don't think either one of them are worried about anybody walking behind them or any sort of distraction. So definitely be mindful of those things, because we've had situations come up in some of our interviews here where the person, their backgrounds weren't really appropriate, or they just didn't seem serious about the opportunity based on kind of how they were dressed and where they were.
Yeah, those are really good points. And I just know from when, so I just moved into the house where I'm at just under a year ago, and I had nothing in here. So sound was a big issue too. So I recommend hopping on with somebody, like you said, Megan, get some feedback as far as like doing a practice run. When I had nothing in this room, there was an echo that I could not get rid of. It was a big issue. Same like there's a washer dryer that's close by. If the washer dryer is on, it's a lot of feedback. So I have to really be considerate of that, because if you just hop on a Zoom meeting and your interviewer can't hear you, well, a lot of it is first impression. So they want to make sure that you're capable of getting yourself in a scenario that you can interview appropriately and not have too many distractions and just focus on the job. Especially too, there's a lot of remote jobs too. If you're interviewing for something that's remote, you want to make sure that your space is appropriate for business. You can be on the phone with clients, whether any sort of job that it is, but you just want to be as professional and portraying yourself in the best light as possible, for sure. And then, so a lot of interviews are, obviously on site too and in person. And there's some prep that is involved with that as well. As far as etiquette, I know one thing that we're always told, candidates, we tell candidates that, don't arrive too early. And you do want to be there early, but don't walk in too early. Maddie, do you have any other recommendations as far as interviewing in person and how you want to make sure that's successful?
Yeah, I think especially right now, there's obviously the added, COVID pressure. So if you are interviewing in person, make sure that you have your mask and that you are, conscious of the fact that someone might not want to shake your hand or things like that. In non-COVID times, I think, the initial handshake is very important. That really, conveys a message to them. I think, like you said, you don't want to be too early, but you do want to make sure you're a little bit early. You don't want to be just rolling in right when the interview's starting. And then I think the way you dress is a huge thing. Dress very professionally. Your presentation is huge. The first thing that they see is how you look. So I think the presentation is really big.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Megan too, when you're interviewing and you're in person, do you bring anything with you? Do you want to make sure you don't bring certain things with you? And are you taking notes as well? What do you think about that?
Yes, my greatest, best mentor of all time told me that whenever you walk into a room, actually, she believes that even, not even in regards to interviews, but just in general, if you're walking into somebody's office, you should always have a notebook and a pen with you. It just makes it look like you care and you have questions and you're taking the time to listen to what they have to say. So definitely an interview, though, I would always bring, a notebook, or if you have some sort of like pad folio, those are always, those always look nice and professional. A pen, and in there too, you can write some of the questions that you have so you don't forget them. I think the worst thing you can do is, and maybe this is another topic, but come to an interview and not have any questions lined up at the end.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. You want to elaborate on that a little bit as far as what kind of questions you would want to ask or avoid?
You'd want to avoid questions around benefits, time off, lunch hours, things like that. Those are all answers that you'll be able to get at the right time. That's not something that you'd want the hiring manager to think is your number one priority. I think everyone wants to hire somebody who's actually interested in the job and shows that they're willing to learn and care about the position that they're applying to and interviewing for. So good questions to ask would be many follow-up questions to things that were discussed in the interview around the role, questions about maybe technology, that they're using, things like that.
Yeah, Maddie, anything that came to mind as far as do's and don'ts for questioning?
Yeah, I think specifically too, if you can come up with questions that are related to the company that show that you've researched, been on their website, you know things about them, that's always a great point. It shows that you really are invested. I think a big thing too that I hear a lot from hiring managers is just that people don't ask for the job. At the end of the interview, ask for the job. Say, what are the next steps? I'm super interested. I think the biggest thing people can do a lot of the time is walk away from the interview and the hiring manager might not know that you want that job. So really just, don't be afraid if you're interested to ask for the job at the end, see kind of where that will go for you.
Yeah, set expectations, and then we'll talk about follow-up too, but that's really good points. Also kind of revert back to, what to bring and what not to bring. Leave your coffee in the car. If you stop at Dunkin's before that, leave that in the car. You can get back to it afterward. And then bringing a pen too. I just remember it was like sophomore year of high school. I interviewed for to be a busser at a restaurant, just bussing tables. And I'm going in to fill out an application and interview with the GM. And he asked me if I had a pen on me. And he kind of scolded me. He said, "You should really have a pen on you." And I don't know why, but that is just, for me, it's happened to me ever since. I literally have a pen in my pocket constantly. Not even just interviewing, but I don't know why that stuck. Maybe that's just a little tick I got ingrained in me. But I saw another question from the chat. If you're not home and you're taking, I assume it's a phone screen or a Zoom interview, can you do it in your car? Is that okay? Pros and cons? Any thoughts, Megan?
I think that's a hard one. We've had a couple of candidates interview here who have said that they're able to step out on lunch for an interview. They're going to be in their car. Is that okay? And we've been able to let the hiring manager know, hey, they're going to be in their car during the interview. I think I would probably try to avoid it. If you have to do it, I would mention at the very beginning. Don't act like it's not happening. Say, "Hey, I know I'm in my car. I had to step out on my lunch break. I'm excited to speak with you, and thanks for making the time, to talk to me today." Just bring it up. Otherwise, it's kind of like the weird elephant in the room.
Yeah, it's really good to address it first. Like, hey, by the way, just so you know, chances are you'll be like, "Oh yeah, totally fine," because I know that we have candidates that are actively working on contract. We still have them interviewing for more permanent roles, and we arrange it so just step out. You're on your break, or just leave the site real quick, go in your car. Phone screen's a lot easier, but if it has to be a video or virtual interview conversation, that can look professional enough, especially if you're dressed appropriately. And I can't imagine that there's anything too inappropriate in the car, so you can kind of get yourself situated with a decent background. That's kind of maybe clear some of the clutter from the back and then angle it right. But that's. Yeah, ins and outs about interviewing, and also I think we touched on follow-up too during kind of sending your resume out. But you interview with a hiring manager, you have the contact info. Do you follow up immediately? You think what if you're not hearing back? How long do you wait? Maddie, any input on what to do about follow-up after interviews?
I always recommend to send a thank you note right away. I think, honestly, even if you're not super interested in the job, it just leaves a good impression that you are thanking them for their time. Also, you'd be surprised how many people don't do it, so it can set you apart, especially on more entry-level jobs, because a lot of people don't think they need to do that. But it goes a long way. I mean, I even remember we had an internal hire that was interviewing with our team, and they interviewed with 5 or 6 different people, and he individually wrote every single person a thank you note, even myself, and I was not even on the hiring board at that point. And that really went a long way with everybody to be like, wow, that was just a really nice gesture and showed that he was very interested.
Would you do, your thank you note digital or handwritten? Old school.
I would email it. I mean, if you do it handwritten, that's nice too, but it might take a little while to get there.
You might have to send it express or drop it back off.
I think it can depend. I think I've seen some higher level candidates like to send a thank you note in the mail, but I think at that level, you're getting jobs that are long processes of hiring. I think a lot of times when your entry level job process is going to be very quick. So to Megan's point, by the time you've sent that letter, they've already probably hired somebody. So probably the email will be better.
Yeah. And then also, Sean mentioned, definitely remember your interviewer's name, not only for, while you're there. Well, one, you arrive. Who do you ask for? I'm here for an interview, I don't remember. Remember your interviewer's name. Thank them at the end. Sean, really appreciate the interview. Looking forward to hearing from you next steps. And then when you're doing the thank yous, make sure, and you're taking notes while you're there too. Write down who you met and who some other people are in the process. So if I'm, interviewing with Megan, for Maddie's team, I want to be able to remember that. Like, Megan, thank you for the interview. I had a really, I enjoyed learning about the company. Sounds like a great opportunity. I would love to work with Maddie on her team and make it. It just adds to it makes it a little more personable. So
I think you're right on that, on the personal part of it, just because I do think too that people can fall into the trap of sending like a very generic thank you note, and if you send the same exact note to 5 people at the same company, they're going to know that. They're probably going to compare those notes. So just at least add one sentence per note that's a little personal to that person, something that you talked about with them that struck a chord with you. Just even a little thing can go a long way.
And yeah, absolutely. And then I got a great question. I'll throw it in there. It's relevant to the interview process. So I know, and everyone's different, but you're about to walk into an interview and you just got the jitters, right? You're a little nervous. And Sean mentioned that Ron Burgundy has this Owl Now Brown Cow unique New York. How do you guys have any speaking tricks or ways to calm the nerves during an interview before or during?
I tell candidates to remember that they're also interviewing the manager, because they need to make sure that it's a job that they're actually interested. So I think when you start to think about things that way, it can sometimes take the pressure off and make you less nervous.
Yeah, I think also if you can really before the interview have kind of a list of your own about why you're a good fit for that job. And while you're sitting there waiting for that interview to start, run through that list in your head, get your confidence of like, yes, I'm qualified for this job. I'm a good fit, and remind yourself of that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Go over the job description, know what you're talking about, because I think the jitters and the nervousness come from the unknown. But if you're, thinking in your head, like, this is a job, this is responsibilities, this is what the company does, you're not going in there and getting thrown any curveballs. Like, you can be confident about what's going on. And then, it's all personal too. If you just have trouble being in front of some people, it's all personal. But hey, breathe, confidence. Plenty of tricks to calm yourself for those sort of things. And I know we talked about some things you don't want to cover during the interview. Pay is one, but when do you discuss pay, and is there a negotiation process? I know it's tricky, but you have thoughts. I know it's different when you're recommending to a candidate as far as from our perspective, but if you're interviewing, Maddie, do you know when or about when you want to have that conversation?
Typically, I think for most of my candidates, that conversation happens post like the first real video or in-person interview. If that goes well and they're going to move to a second round, I think that's typically when the conversations are happening. But I would say I don't personally have a ton of experience with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the manager probably already knows what you're shooting for, whether you go through a recruiter or on your own. If you go through a recruiter, we're sending over your salary typically. If you're applying on your own, usually there's a spot where you need to enter what your salary expectations are. So I'd be prepared in case it does come up in the first interview, but typically from what I've seen, it comes up in the second or third interview when it's looking like you might get the opportunity.
Yeah. So wait till later in the process, not right out the gate, because you don't want to focus on just that. Also, too, depending on the type of job you're going for, if it's an hourly role, you kind of know what to expect. If you're going for like a permanent, salaried role, I guess, not only would it be like the base or whatever, but you got to think about benefits as well and weigh that in. So it's appropriate to ask, what do your benefits look like? What are some extra perks? Like, have them, if you're getting to the offer stage, they need to impress you just as you need to impress them. ask them, like, what's your benefits package look like? Why do employees want to work here? But for the end, I say that's a better route to go instead of right off the bat. And then I've got another good question here in the chat too. Definitely appropriate to ask, ask the hiring manager or interviewer what they like about working at the company. But what are your weaknesses is always that one, what do you say? And do you have anything prepped for that? Maddie, would you be able to, do you have a good recommendation on, hey, what are your weaknesses?
Yeah, I think definitely be prepped for this question. There's nothing worse than when this question is asked and the person's just staring at you blankly and has nothing to say. But I do think that one thing people fall into is things like, oh, my biggest weakness is I'm a perfectionist and I have to have everything just right. And that's not what people are looking for. I mean, they're not looking for some type of a fake weakness that you're going to use to trump up how great you are. I think this is a great way to use something like even a past weakness that you're working on that maybe you can show you've made some strides on. Like, I used to be, not great at delegating work to other people, but recently I've been able to, work out some processes to be able to work better with others and delegate that work. So I think using it as a way to kind of acknowledge something that you're currently working on is a better way to do it. That way people kind of know that you can acknowledge a real weakness, but that you also will work on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question. And to add to that too, have something kind of prepared, but make sure that is something, like you said, Maddie, that you're working on. Like it's a fault, but you have action items that you're taking to correct that, and you're confident in it. I think one of my go-to ones that I've just kind of developed, and when I hear that question, I think, okay, well, I would probably respond to, I haven't interviewed in a little bit, but time management. One of my weaknesses is time management, but from using a calendar and blocking off time and thinking about it step by step and prioritizing, I can overcome that. But that is a weakness. So you're honest, but you can overcome it. It's not an issue, and they're really thinking about it's all about thought process and correcting poor behavior into a way that's going to be not an issue for them, and shows that you can grow and learn and all that good stuff. So you're, I guess chronologically, you're interviewing, and then you land the job, or you're close to an offer. But then again, going back to hiring managers and looking at your social media output, I think Facebook's an easy one. So, and I think I want to go to Maddie first for Facebook. Now, do you look at people's Facebook when you're interviewing and then try to figure out what kind of content they're putting out there, and what's how does that weigh in on you as a recruiter and potentially hiring managers?
So I personally don't so much. I will say I do think that this is going to be something that's super dependent on age demographics. Like personally, I just don't use Facebook very much. So and people in my network don't use Facebook very much. So I don't even think of that as a place to get a lot of content for people. I think social media people are kind of moving away from that. But I do think for certain applicants that's relevant. I definitely Google all of my applicants. So if your social media comes up, I will look at it. So I think, making sure that your privacy settings are set so that that's not what's immediately popping up. But I think no matter what, you want to make sure that any of your social media is something that you can give a hiring manager see. That's just kind of a basic great tip for job searching in general.
Yeah. I know, and Facebook goes back quite a ways too. It can for some people. So you want to make sure those privacy settings are correct, because you don't want a random person being able to see your entire Facebook life history, for good or bad. But I think Facebook is definitely the more personal social media one, and then LinkedIn too. I know Megan, you're like a LinkedIn guru with 10,000 plus connects. So if you need to network with somebody, Megan is awesome. As far as building your own personal brand, what are you doing on LinkedIn to boost that, aesthetically? Your action items, what do you do?
Yeah, I love LinkedIn. I'm excited that you asked me about it. I think it's really important that you have an appropriate picture as your profile icon, and then also there's an option to add a cover photo on LinkedIn. With that, I would say you could either put your current company's banner or something up top. For me, I have a picture of a beach that that I took. I took a picture in Miami. I love Miami, and I figured I'd showcase that on the top of my LinkedIn page. So I think it's a balance between, showing some of your personal side, but also keeping it, business appropriate as well. I think LinkedIn is a great tool to network in general. Even somebody who might not be looking for a job right now, for instance, if you're in customer service, it would make a lot of sense for you to get on LinkedIn and connect with not only other people in customer service, but customer service managers. When you connect, you could even send something like, hey, I saw that you're a customer service manager. I'm in customer service myself. I thought it may make sense for us to know each other. Something simple like that. And before you know it, your network will become bigger and bigger. And then the people that you come across on LinkedIn, it's crazy. You can make awesome connections on there and even connect to other people. I would definitely recommend it to anyone and everyone. And I'd be happy to, if anyone wants to reach out, I'd be happy to explain a little bit more on that.
Yeah, we didn't mention it too much on this, on this platform yet, but I think last time around we had this discussion. We had an expert on, she did like exploratory interviews, and it was just about, I think the way, one method to get in is if you're on LinkedIn, figure out what companies that are in the area that you like, and figure out a hiring manager that is relevant, and don't hesitate to like message them. Hey, I would love to learn a little bit more about your company, about what you do, what it's like your company. Can I buy you a coffee? Can we discuss it? A lot of people would be really receptive to helping you out and kind of filling you in on some info, whether it's specifically for that industry, company, or the job in general. Explore and just get out there. Matt, anything in addition to how you use LinkedIn, and any tips, tricks, and whatnot?
Yeah, I just think LinkedIn is like the biggest tool right now. I think everyone's using that. That's where they're looking for talent. And I think as a candidate, it's really a great way to showcase yourself and show what you're interested in. You're a recent grad, you don't have a lot of actual job experience. Like Megan said, look for companies that you're interested in, to people that, are managers at these places that, could have a foot in the door. And then that can also be a great way to, you see a job online that you want to apply to. Great. Now you can go on LinkedIn and look up who's in HR at that company, who works in that department, who maybe you can connect with and say, hey, I just, shot a resume over for this job and I see that you work there. Would love to kind of get some input, even if it's just someone lower level, to get some input on what the job's like. You never know where those connections could lead. Especially as like a new job searcher or, anyone on the job market. That should be like your main priority, to make sure your LinkedIn is updated. You're also regularly posting content. I think that's a big thing. Even I'm personally working on to build my personal brand, making sure you're sharing articles, you're showing that you have engagement, you're commenting on posts, things like that.
Yeah. And also too, like kind of general kind of tips on LinkedIn, and to be professional, just keep it neutral. I mean, it's definitely a political world, but keep everything neutral, especially when you're portraying yourself, especially in the marketplace. If you're sharing an article, read the article first. I mean, it might be a great headline, but if you read into it, the content of it might be a little skewed. So make sure that you're only forwarding and sharing things that are actually appropriate too. That's a really good point. Let's see. And then Sean had I don't use Twitter really very much. Do either of you use Twitter? Do you have a separate professional Twitter? Any recommendation or experience?
I don't use Twitter that much. I probably should look into it a little more. I know that that's a space where people are sharing a lot of articles and things like that. So maybe I should look into it. I'm not sure, but it's not really in my expertise, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't use it a ton either, just because I think it can be challenging sometimes to connect with the groups of people I'm trying to connect with on there. But I think if you are using it for professional engagement, probably good to have a separate one, just because that way you can make sure that you absolutely have, all your interactions professionally on one versus the other, and there's not going to be any mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, not a whole lot of information on Twitter personally, but definitely a good avenue. As a lot of companies are leaning on it heavily in different ways. Then kind of revert back to LinkedIn, and if you're just job search, I just thought of this, it might be relevant, but if you're applying different jobs, you don't want your commute to be so far. So I'm thinking, like, if you're driving around your town, your area during your regular errands and commute, there's companies that you just don't know a lot about and interested in, like write down while you're driving, like, oh, what's that company? What's this company? And look them up on LinkedIn. Follow them. Find some people that you might already be connected with. Ask them questions, because at the end of the day, if you land a job that is within your range, like you don't have to apply somewhere and, oh, shoot, it's 45 minutes away. Now, pros and cons, but I'd rather be closer to home.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so we have, we're kind of getting toward 1 o'clock, and a really good discussion. I want to get any questions that people have, definitely ask at the bottom or throw in the chat. I know Holly asked a good one too, about feedback for interviews. Is it appropriate to, if you're going through multiple rounds of interviews, is it appropriate to ask for feedback as to why, I assume if you're offered the job, or not offered the job. So what would feedback be if you're not offered the job?
I think it's always fine to ask for feedback. You may not always get the feedback, but it's always nice to ask for it. I think especially because when you're job searching, you do want to know, was it because another candidate just was a better fit, or did I do something that was a problem? And I think hiring managers should also appreciate that. So I think sending a note saying, I really appreciated being able to go through the interview process. I understand you move forward with another candidate. I'm just curious if you have any interview feedback that will help me, in my next interview. I think that's a great thing to do.
Yeah, no, we half the time get feedback. We would like to get more feedback. Obviously, it helps, but just be light about it. Hey, I assume that I wasn't offered the role, or are you moving forward with that? And can I just ask you, is there anything that you recommend that I do for my next interview, or just keep it light and kind of like a learning lesson for you, rather than like, what the hell, I didn't get a job.
Yeah.
Right, and then. Let's see. And actually, how could, another question from the discussion, how can people connect with us as recruiters? And then I would keep it general too, because we're not the only recruiters out there. We're great, but recommendation on people looking for recruiters, as far as I think we can go into like general or specific or specialized. Megan, do you have a recommendation on like who you reach out to or how?
Yeah, LinkedIn I think is great. I think, when you're looking at somebody's LinkedIn page, you can kind of tell if they're, how invested they are in the market. A lot of times you'll see recruiters have, I think they're called endorsements or recommendations on LinkedIn, where some of their candidates write up something, nice about them. I would just do your research, even, your research on the recruiting company. But I think at the end of the day, you have to like the recruiter that you're working with. So LinkedIn is a great way to kind of see what they look like, see what some of their interests might be, and determine if you guys might be a good fit to work together.
Yeah, look into what people specialize in. Like myself, I do mainly HR, administration, customer service. Megan, IT and tech. So our groups of companies, we have finance and accounting, we have IT and tech. We have a direct sales professional search program. So we have our specializations. I know there's firms out there that are national or general. So if you really don't know what you are into, or if it's like manufacturing or engineering, there are very specific recruiters, and there's general ones too. So kind of just do a search. Megan, perfect LinkedIn too. And then Maddie, as far as I got a question for Sean too, how much weight does like Glassdoor carry on employment reference in your opinion? Do you lean into Glassdoor at all, or?
I think Glassdoor probably carries a lot more weight from the employee side when you're going into a company. I think that's a big thing as far as how your company is rated. But I do think that's something that's really important in terms of candidates have good experience with you, so that they rate your company well. And I think more and more people are using that as kind of a place to look at company statuses. I think it is a kind of a growing place that people are looking at.
Yeah, definitely good to get some insight, but take it with a grain of salt too, because people that are going to post negative things, most often people are going to post negative and go out of their way to post something positive. So see what the comment is. If it's something you can relate to or something that's just way out there, keep that in mind. Kurt had a really good question too. Can you summarize the difference between recruiters and headhunters? And I'm thinking, the difference between like a retained search person or recruiters, or there could be some more differences too. Megan, do you have a experience with retained or whatnot?
No, not personally. I don't. I know that there are some companies that you can hire that you kind of keep on retainer, and they you pay them like a monthly premium or something, and they're kind of your resource. I think that's more so on the employer side though, but they'd be your resource to find candidates for your company. I don't know. I have candidates, or people call me headhunters. Call me a headhunter all the time. I don't necessarily feel offended by it. I don't know if I should, but I think that people, mix those two up. I think that they're kind of one and the same in my mind.
Yeah, they can be interchangeable. Like Sean said, exactly, like Dog the Bounty Hunter, he's a headhunter. He's looking for something very specific. So companies reach out to a headhunter. And I think more if there's like a national search too, where relocation is possible. So a company in New Hampshire is like, I need a super specific engineer. They can be anywhere in the country, like just find them. Like they need this one person, they're paying for this one person. But a recruiter is where we are locally connected across all industries, top to bottom, with all hiring managers, and we're constantly getting in jobs. We're working on hundreds of different jobs at one time, and we're connecting with hundreds of candidates at the same time in the area. So we are matching local candidates to local companies. So like in the job of a recruiter, whether that's the agency side, or you also see recruiters, and don't shy away from recruiters, I would say regardless, but a lot are directly corporate recruiters too, because companies hire their own recruiting talent acquisition teams. So don't shy away from working with a recruiter. Like, oh no, it's a recruiter. Like sometimes they're a direct department of that company, so they're recruiting directly for that company, whereas we recruit for a lot of different companies. And let's see, Kurt, always considered a headhunter to be on contract with the employer. I think. Yeah, that's kind of what Megan mentioned too, and what we had with what we were talking about with the retained search, where a company pays headhunter a premium or upfront to find a specific person. But again, depends how you use it, interchangeable. And then let's see, any other, like, I don't know, did we miss anything? No. Love all the questions, Kurt. Appreciate it. And Sean, all the out of the box questions for sure. Mm-hmm. So we definitely, I'll wrap it up. We really appreciate you having you too. Really great discussion. We filled up the hour really easily. I think back and forth we covered a lot of topics. As Manchester Young Professionals, thanks you, and we want to put on more great content for Adulting 101. Anybody that's watching, if they have insight or suggestions on topics that we should cover, definitely bubble them up. If you're not a member of Manchester Young Professionals already, check out the website, social media, follow us, join as a member, get our monthly newsletter, see what's going on. We're constantly putting on events, content to educate, empower, and engage the local community. So love the coordination from the Manchester Chamber, and we'll see you all next time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Gabe.
Thank you guys so much. This was great.
Guys.
Link with us on LinkedIn.
Yes, please.
Yeah, Megan Lustig, Alexander Technology Group, Maddie Bushey, KNF&T Staffing Resources, Gabe Dano, the Nagler Group Staffing Recruiting. We'll follow up with all the information. Feel free to reach out to us anytime.